Hello, my name's Geoff Kersey and this video is all about improving your skies in watercolour. In my opinion, the most important part of any watercolour painting is the sky. It sets the whole mood and atmosphere for the picture. I think we'd all love to paint beautiful skies full of atmosphere and light, and when we do, we're quite excited by it and we can't wait to get on with the rest of the picture. It's very motivating. However, if it doesn't work out very well, we're a bit disappointed and frustrated, and I think often we feel like giving up. So I'm going to show you several different methods and techniques for painting skies, and I think it will really pay dividends if you practice these over and over again and absorb them into your own style of painting. So let's have a look at the first example. For this first example, I'm going to use cobalt blue, cobalt violet, burnt sienna and Naples yellow. And for the brushes I'm using a large filbert, a number 16, a number 12 and a number 4. I'm going to start just by drawing out a few lines just to get me the feel of the subject. Nothing too complicated at this stage. Now in this photograph, the sky's cut a little bit bland, it's not very interesting, but we're going to put a bit more colour into it than that. I'm going to mix 3 washes. I'm going to use a large number 16 brush so that I mix plenty of paint. Better to have some left over than to run out halfway through. And the first colour I'm going to mix is a thin wash of Naples yellow. And the second colour is cobalt blue with a bit of cobalt violet to warm it. And then the third wash, cobalt blue again with cobalt violet, just the same as the last colour. And this time I'm going to grey it with a bit of burnt sienna. Now it's very important that I mix the colour first like that, because when I start painting the sky I don't want to have to stop to mix some more colour. This is very much a wet in wet sky. So all the upper part of the paper right down to the horizon line, I'm going to wet that with a large flat brush and I'm just laying in a wash of clear water. Now I'm going to use a 1-inch filbert brush. Ideal for skies. It's a flat brush, but it's rounded at the edge so it doesn't give square shapes in your sky. It gives nice round edges like clouds. And I'm going to just float this Naples yellow in the lower part of the sky down towards the horizon. Then wash my brush. If I've got that yellow on the brush and I dip it in the blue, I'll get a green, which I don't want. And now I'm going to pick up the cobalt blue and cobalt violet and bring that in from the top of the sky. Just keeping this loose wet in wet effect. And now I'm going to take the grey mixture. I'm going to use that pretty much in the lower part of the sky to look like shadow from clouds. Working it along, it works in with that Naples yellow. And go back in with a little more of the cobalt blue and cobalt violet. And the top as well with it to darken it a little bit at the top. And really that's it, that's all I have to do. It's important that you don't spend too long on this stage so you leave some nice areas of light in the picture instead of covering it all up with paint. We just need to let that dry now. Well, that's dried out now, and what we've got is a nice loose wet in wet sky with some nice colours in it. Now I think no sky is quite complete without it set in a landscape, so I'm just going to do quite a simple landscape like a view across a lake here just to finish off the picture for you. I'm going to use a number 12 brush, and the bottom part of the picture where it meets the horizon, where the sky meets the horizon, I'm just going to dampen that again with clear water. I'm now going to use the same 2 colours again, the cobalt blue and cobalt violet, and then the same mixture mixed with a bit of burnt sienna, just like we used in the sky. It's quite important to keep the same colours throughout so you have that continuity. So just float these in to create loose shapes to represent these trees across the lake. Now I'm picking up the greyer mixture and bringing that down to a nice flat level line. Now again, we just need to let that dry before we do a final finishing touch to it. Well, now that's dried, I'm just going to put a little bit more detail in now to complete the picture. So I'm going to put a couple of trees in a bit more detail across the lake in the distance here. And for that, I'm going to mix a very thin wash of burnt sienna and just grey that slightly with a bit of cobalt blue. And it's really about putting a simple shape in to represent some trees just across the water there. A bit more here as well, I think. And while that's drying now, we'll look at painting the water. And I'm going to wet all the foreground area, taking care to leave a little bit of clean white paper at the edge of the horizon, just under those trees. Now, because the water's a reflection, where I had that Naples yellow at the base of the sky, that's got to be at the top of the water, so we'll put that one in first. Just trying to preserve that little bit of white where it meets the trees there. And now the next colour is that bit of burnt sienna and cobalt blue and cobalt violet. And work that in while the Naples yellow is still damp. And now just finish this off with the cobalt blue and cobalt violet. So the colour I had at the top of the sky is now at the bottom of the water. Now there's one little thing. I'm just going to use a very fine brush, a number 4, with a good sharp point, just to finish off a bit of detailing on those trees across the water. I'm still going to use cobalt blue and burnt sienna, but quite a bit thicker now. Again, not too much detail, because I've got to remember these are quite a way across into the middle distance. I've not got it quite level there, so I'm going to fill in a little bit just to get the line level. So there we are, quite a simple scene really, that's nearly 3/4 sky, just painted with 4 colours to create that harmony throughout the painting. We could leave it like that, or if we wanted to take it further, add a bit of foreground interest, but remember to still use that same 4 colours, as I've done here. In this example, we made an uninteresting pale sky more colourful. It's important to have all the colours ready before you wet the background with clear water, and then to paint quickly and not overwork, and make the sky lighter towards the horizon. For this demonstration, I'm going to use cobalt blue, rose madder, neutral tint and white gouache. For the brushes, I'm using a number 16, a 10, an 8 and a 4. Plus a 1.5 inch and a 1 inch flat. I'm going to start by just drawing a line to represent the horizon. And then using a large flat brush, I'm going to wet the whole of the sky area with clean water. By wetting all this like this, it keeps it workable for longer once I start painting. And I'm coming down as far as the horizon. Now using a smaller flat brush, this is a 1 inch one, I'm going to pick up this wash that I've mixed of just cobalt blue with a bit of rose madder in it and start laying a flat wash across the top of the sky. When I get about 2/3 of the way down, I'm going to start introducing clear water so the colour gets paler. It's always a good idea with skies to get it paler towards the horizon. This helps to create aerial perspective in your picture. Then straight away I'm going to take some kitchen roll, fold it up, and I'm using a technique called dabbing out. I'm going to try and create some cloud shapes across the sky. It's important that you make these irregular. If the shapes are too even and contrived, it doesn't look as real. This just takes the colour back out again. Now I'm going to fold it up into a smaller piece and then create a few smaller cloud shapes nearer the horizon, again helping with aerial perspective in the picture. Obviously these are smaller because they're further away. And I think we'll just take a cloud shape out of the top corner here. Okay, so we'll leave that to dry. Now that's dried, I'm going to create some cloud shadows to give the sky a bit more depth. For this I'm going to mix some neutral tint and rose madder, keeping it quite thin. I don't want anything too heavy. It's important that this is at the base of the clouds and that I leave some white at the top. And before I go too far with it, I'm going to clean the brush, take the worst of the moisture off so it's just damp, and soften the edges in. Continue along working like that into each cloud. A little bit of cloud shadow and then a damp clean brush to soften it in. Now for these smaller clouds nearer the horizon, it's the same principle but smaller marks, just to look like shadow under these small distant clouds. Just soften them in. Remembering all the time to vary the sizes and shapes so that they look more natural. And this large cloud at the top right. You need to work fairly rapidly. You need to soften the paint in as soon as you've put it on before it has a chance to dry. And just finally, we'll put a bit of shadow into the top left to balance out with that at the other side. And again, a damp brush just to soften it in. So we'll just leave that to dry now. Now that the sky's dried, I'm going to paint a line across the horizon, and I'm going to use here the strongest tone in the picture. So it's a mix of neutral tint and cobalt blue. I'm using a number 8 brush because I don't want to make this too big a mark. We need to get a nice neat straight line where the horizon meets the water, and make the line uneven at the top to represent the distant trees. It's a good idea with something like this to use a smaller brush and in one or two places soften the top to make it look a little bit misty and distant. Now I can go straight on now to the water, just bringing it down to the foreground, and I'm going to use the same colours as I used in the sky. I'm going to try and drag the colour across the paper quite quickly so I'll pick up the texture of the paper and leave a few bits of white to look like light sparkling on the surface of the water. Then introduce the neutral tint with rose madder. And now the colour I used on that distance, just a touch of water to make it slightly thinner, just to bring the foreground really forward. And now we'll leave that to dry before doing a few finishing touches. Now for a few bits of detail, I'm just going to paint some boats into the picture using a small number 4 brush. I'm doing this one with a bit of white gouache, deliberately putting it against that dark tone that's behind it. I need the gouache quite thick. And then with just a little bit of neutral tint and cobalt blue, put the shape in for the boat. Now I'm going to continue just with a few more boats with a variety of gouache and some of that neutral tint and cobalt blue. Have your tissue ready to start dabbing out the cloud shapes immediately so that you work the clouds in while the background is still wet. Make these cloud shapes random so they don't look contrived. And also make the cloud shape smaller as you progress down towards the horizon. This creates perspective in your painting. In this hazy winter sky, I'm going to use vermilion, cobalt blue and neutral tint. And in the brushes, I'm using a large filbert, a number 16, 10 and 6. In this next sky, I'm going to use a technique called glazing. So I'm going to start off with a thin wash of vermilion. I'm not wetting the surface this time, I'm going straight onto the paper and I'm using a large filbert brush. And I'm starting at the horizon. This sky is going to be lighter towards the top because the light source is quite high up this time. Now as I get towards the top, I'm thinning the paint slightly. And I'm going to try and just leave an area of white paper right in the top at the middle as the brightest part of the sky. Now while that's drying, I'm going to mix the next glaze, a thin wash of cobalt blue. I'm going to mix it again with my large number 16 brush, and I want plenty of water. It's quite important with glazing that you keep the colours thin and watery so that you can get the colour from the previous wash coming through. Okay, so that's colours ready. It's very important when you're doing this that you do make sure the first glaze is totally dry. And I'm going to use the large filbert brush again and start at the bottom. I'm filling this area with this paint with horizontal strokes, and just like the last one, as I get to the top, I'm thinning the paint out with some water so that in the same place as the previous wash started to thin out, this one does as well. I'm using the side of the brush as well, so I take advantage of the texture of the paper by just skimming over the surface and getting that dry brush effect. Now while that's drying, I'm going to mix the final wash with neutral tint, again keeping the wash quite thin. Using my number 16 brush again, plenty of water. The beauty of this glazing method is that you're not mixing the colours in your palette, you're using 3 separate colours. The effect is that they mix on the paper because you perceive each colour through the one on top of it. And then again using the filbert brush and starting at the horizon. I'm going to make this one into a snow scene, and so that I get that real contrast with the bright colour of the snow against the dark sky, I'm getting the colour quite dark towards the horizon. Again now as I work up the paper, I'm going to add some water to it to thin it a bit. Where it meets the dry paper here, I'm just leaving it to look like a thin cloud. I'm taking advantage of the rough texture of the paper to help create this effect. And just fill in any of those little gaps where I've missed the paper. And we'll leave that to dry. Now to create this distance on the horizon, I'm using a mixture of all 3 of the colours I used in the sky. That's the vermilion, cobalt blue and neutral tint, all mixed together. And the idea isn't to make it look too organised, to make some quite irregular random shapes. We'll create a little church on the landscape just to add a bit of interest. And then right off the edge of the picture. Right, well as this is a winter scene, we've got quite a dramatic sky with the light at the top and the dark cloud near the horizon. So I want a nice bright white where the dark line meets the snow here. But I want to put some shadows in the foreground to bring that nearer. And it's essential on any landscape painting when you're doing shadows to mix them from the same colours as your sky. So I'm going to use my number 16 brush so I can put plenty of paint down. And I'm going to start with a thin wash of vermilion, just like I started with on the sky. But I don't need to build these up in glazes, I can put these together wet in wet, let them merge on the paper. And as that gets nearer to the horizon, I'm fading it out with some clear water. And then bring the red right down to the bottom. Now I'm going to pick up some cobalt blue and then brush that in along the front of the picture, softening it into the vermilion. I'll get a bit of clear water just to soften it in. And now just a final wash of neutral tint right at the bottom of the picture to bring that forward. And that emphasises the harmony of the picture. We've just used those three colours throughout. And that's it, a dramatic winter landscape painted with just three colours. For this example of a hazy sky, each wash should be totally dry before glazing over with another wash. Thin the washes towards the top of the picture and leave a bit of dry white paper at the top. Remember, this is your light source. Also keep the glazes thin so through each glaze you can see the colour from the one underneath. In this example of a warm sunset, I'm going to use cobalt blue and French ultramarine, light red, raw sienna and lemon yellow. In the brushes I'm using a number 16, a number 12 and a rigger. We're going to need quite a few colours for this one, and it's very important that we mix all these before we start painting. We're going to wet the whole of the background and drop these colours in wet. And if we're too slow doing that, what will happen is the water will start to dry out, and we're not painting wet in wet, we're painting wet on damp, and that's where you get these awkward cauliflowers that spoils many a sky. So the first colour I've mixed there is a mixture of cobalt blue and ultramarine blue. Now I'm going to take a mix of lemon yellow. Lemon yellow isn't a colour you'd use very often in a sky, but in a sunset like this it gives us that real brilliance, that brightness. Now I'm going to take some raw sienna, and I'm going to warm that up with just a little touch of light red. And now I want some colour for the clouds, and I'm going to take some ultramarine blue and mix a touch of light red with that to grey it. Then I want another mix very similar but slightly redder, so I'll put more light red with this one. And now that the colours are ready, we'll coat the whole of the background with a wash of clean water with the large flat brush. So we just give the surface a nice even coating of clean water. It's important that you put plenty of water on so that it'll take quite a while to dry and it gives you longer to work into it. Now using a smaller flat brush, a 1-inch one, we start at the top with that mixture of ultramarine and cobalt blue, laying in a flat wash. Now about halfway down the sky I'm going to add water so that it starts to fade out. And then it's very important to clean the brush thoroughly before you pick up the yellow, or we'll get green. Now I'm brushing in a bit of that lemon yellow into the centre. Just a touch of that. And now the raw sienna with light red. I'll add a touch more light red to that, I think. And a touch more. Now it's important now that straight away we carry on with these cloud shapes in the sky while the paper's still nice and wet. So I've got a mixture here of ultramarine blue and light red, and with my number 16 brush I'm just putting in some soft cloud shapes. A bit of the blue in there as well. We'll put a bit more of that ultramarine and light red into the top corner where there's a bit of cloud up there. And now lower down this gets redder, so I'm using this mix of ultramarine and light red. And this one's got a bit more light red in it this time. Make these marks a bit smaller to help with the perspective. With a few indications of wispy clouds away in the distance. Now in the upper area of the picture, this cloud is quite a bit bluer and stronger, so I'm just going to mix a touch more of that ultramarine blue and light red. This is a bit thicker this time. And I'm just going to lay this in here. And a little bit at the top. And we'll just leave that to dry. So now that that's dry, we'll just put a simple landscape in to finish it off. Now we've used 5 colours so far, and I'm going to stick to those. I'm not going to create anything new now. I'm going to use those same colours just to finish the painting off. Right, so we'll start with that wash of raw sienna and light red. I'm using a number 12 brush just to indicate a few simple hills. Now working this ultramarine and light red. Now what happens with a sunset scene like this is a lot of the landscape is more or less silhouette. So I want quite dark, rich colours. And now for the foreground, I'm going to use that really strong mixture of ultramarine and light red to bring the foreground really forward towards the viewer. And we can use that mixture, still with this number 12 brush, to put just a little bit of detail in. Say a bush across here. Just suggesting a few bits of detail. And now just to finish it off, I'm going to take my rigger brush and some more of that strong mix of ultramarine blue and light red. And we'll just indicate a little tree at this right hand side. Just this little bit of detail to finish it off. And that's fine. The most important thing you have to remember with a sky like this one is to get that wet in wet effect to work out. You have to have everything ready before you wet the paper. Once you've wet your paper, go straight in with your colours and try and limit yourself to time. If you limit yourself to 30 to 45 seconds, something like that, and then make yourself stop painting before you start making the colours all muddy. We used quite vivid colour in this sunset. But don't let the blue and yellow mix on the paper, as this will create a green. Work quickly so you can drop the cloud colour in while the sky is still wet, and don't overwork. For this demonstration I'm going to use cobalt blue, raw sienna, neutral tint and sepia. And in the brushes a large filbert, a number 16 and a number 8. This one's going to be a dramatic stormy sky, great fun to paint. And I've pre-mixed 4 washes. We've got a wash of raw sienna, cobalt blue, neutral tint and sepia. And it's very important that I wet the paper first and float these colours in and let them merge together on the paper. So I need to work quite quickly. I've just drawn a pencil line across to represent the horizon. I'll give the painting a nice even coating of clean water. It's important that it is even because you don't want puddles forming. And bring that right down to that horizon line. And then straight away with the large filbert brush, I'm going to start laying in the raw sienna. Putting this more towards the bottom of the sky. And now the cobalt blue, and I'm bringing that in starting at the top. Okay. Now the neutral tint, and let a bit of that mix with the blue on the paper. Just indicate some smaller clouds to help with the perspective. And finally, the sepia. Starting at the top. If generally your sky is darker towards the top, again that helps with the perspective. And we'll leave that to dry. Very important there that you work quickly and let those colours merge and mix on the paper. And now that that's dry, I'm just going to put a simple landscape in just to complement the sky and complete the picture. But again, I'm going to stick to those same colours that I've used so far. So taking a number 8 brush, I'm going to mix together some neutral tint and cobalt blue. This is a stronger mixture than I used in the sky, it's a little bit thicker. And I want to suggest some cliffs away off in the distance. I'm adding a touch of water to vary the tone so that it's not all one flat colour. And I'm making this line diminish as it gets further and further away. And then we'll let that dry. And now that that's dry, I'm just going to finish it off like a beach scene with a bit of sandy colour. So I'm going to mix some more raw sienna, but this time it's just a little bit stronger. So I'm using my number 16 brush so I can get quite sweeping strokes. I'm bringing that across. I'll leave a little gap out to look like to represent the sea coming in at the right hand side. And now as that comes down to the bottom of the picture, I want to introduce a bit of darker colour for shadow. So I'm going to take some more of that raw sienna and I'm going to add a bit of sepia to it. And sweep that in across the foreground with quite rapid strokes, keeping the lines parallel so it describes the flat shape of the landscape. And now while that's still wet, to make it really harmonise with the sky, I'm going to put that other colour in, some neutral tint. Don't be afraid to come quite dark for foregrounds. It really brings it forward. And now just to suggest this bit of sea, I'm going to use a number 8 brush and starting with a bit of cobalt blue, continue that horizon line. And then introduce a little bit of the neutral tint into it. Try and leave a little bit of dry white paper to look like the breakers. Okay, and that's all we need to do a painting with a strong, heavy, stormy sky with a brightly lit landscape. In this heavy, dramatic sky, wet the paper evenly. You don't want puddles on the surface. Keep the 4 washes separate on your palette so they can merge on the paper. This can sometimes create new and interesting colours. Make the sky darker at the top and lighter towards the horizon. And float your colours in quickly and then leave it alone to dry. For this example of how to capture movement in a sky, I'm going to use cobalt blue, cerulean blue, neutral tint, rose madder, raw sienna, burnt sienna, aureolin and viridian. And in the brushes I'm using a large filbert, a number 16, 12, 10 and 4. I'm going to start by mixing some cobalt blue with my number 16 brush. And I'm adding to that some cerulean blue. Cerulean blue is a cooler blue than cobalt and it just cools the colour down for us. Now I'm going to wet the paper with the large filbert brush instead of the flat brush, because this time I want to wet the paper and try and create the beginnings of some cloud shapes with the water, leaving one or two dry areas of paper as well. So starting in from the top, working this water down, trying to leave, as I say, a few dry areas. I've put a few pencil marks in to indicate a simple landscape. Quite important on this one, because with cloud movement you do get shadows across the landscape as well, and I'll show you how to do those. And I'm just stopping this water just below the top of the landscape. Now that cobalt blue and cerulean blue. Bringing it down, still leaving the one or two dry areas. I think I'll introduce a touch more of the cerulean blue to cool the sky as it gets nearer to the horizon. And there's a couple of places in this one where I feel I could have left just a bit more white paper. And if I'm quick enough, with a tissue, I can dab a few of those out. And now we'll leave that to dry. Now that that's dry, I can see that it makes quite a good sky on its own. But what I do want to do is work it on a bit further by creating a bit of cloud shadow. So I'm going to mix with my number 16 brush a thin wash of neutral tint. Neutral tint's an excellent colour for cloud shadows, really natural looking. And it does help if you warm it slightly with just a little touch of rose madder. Now I'm going to wash the number 16 brush thoroughly, and then as I did in the first stage, I'm going to wet the paper. I'm not using the larger brush now because I want to be able to control a bit more now where I'm putting the wash, so I don't totally obliterate the first washes that I put down. So I'm going to try and put this clear water in the shape of cloud shadows underneath the lighter areas that I left in the picture the first time. And I'm trying to take good advantage of the rough texture of the paper to help me to achieve this effect. And now with the neutral tint and rose madder, just float that in. As we go along, there's some areas I want to soften and some areas I want to leave a harder line to give it that variety. Again, work that in a bit with a bit of clear water. It's important when you add a bit of clear water at this stage, you don't flood it. And as I come down towards the horizon, I'm going to make these cloud shadows a bit smaller so that I try and get that aerial perspective into the picture. Again, just dampen them in. And then just using the point of the brush to look like it's way in the distance, just a few cloud shapes. Trying to get that feeling of movement across the land. Okay, so that's that second stage, and we'll just let that dry. I'm going to paint now a simple landscape just to complete the picture. I'm going to start with the same colours as I've used in the sky, those blues and greys for the distant hills. So we'll start with the number 12 brush, and that's cobalt blue with a little bit of cerulean blue, a little bit stronger than I used it in the sky. I'm going to take some raw sienna, and I'm going to warm that raw sienna with a little touch of burnt sienna. Now I'm going to make a green with Aureolin with just a touch of cobalt blue. And finally, Viridian, but I'm going to darken that with some burnt sienna. Now, with a number 10 brush now, we'll start painting this landscape. Just suggest a few distant hills, first of all with the cobalt and cerulean blue. Now the neutral tint with just a bit of rose madder. Now let's take that nice warm colour, the raw sienna, with a touch of burnt sienna. Now the green. Keeping my brush strokes horizontal, again to help describe the shape of the land. And now the dark green, to bring it right down to the foreground. And I'm going to work in with that, just to sort of tie it up with the sky, a little bit of neutral tint and rose madder. Now let's look, with a number 4 brush, I'm now just going to suggest a hint of detail, a few things that represent like little hedgerows and dry stone walls, just to give the landscape some shape. I'll start with some cobalt blue and neutral tint. And using the fine point of the brush, we'll just pick out 1 or 2 little bits of detail. It's a long way away, so we don't want anything too detailed. Now as these shapes get a bit nearer to the foreground, I'm going to warm the colour by adding a bit of burnt sienna. Add a bit of that dark green into it now. Not mixing anything new now, I'm going to make all this out of the colours that I've got. Just a suggestion of a hedgerow across the middle distance there. And we'll just take that dark green and put a large fir tree in at this side here. Another one next to it, keeping it quite, using the point of the brush to get it quite pointed at the top. Okay, we'll just let that dry, and a final touch will be to put a few shadows across these fields. And with a number 10 brush, put a few shadows, and you need to put these in quite quickly and not too many. If you obliterate the bright areas of the landscape, you spoil the effect. So it's a case of just putting a few in quite quickly and leaving some areas brighter. And that's all we need to do to complete the picture. I wanted to create a feeling of movement in this example, so I'll wet the background with a filbert brush, not a flat wash brush. You're almost trying to paint the shapes of clouds with the clear water. And before the next stage, make sure that this stage is totally dry. When you use the clear water to soften the edges of the clouds, make sure the brush isn't too loaded or you'll just wash the colour away. If you think your cloud shadows are too dark, remember that watercolour lightens as it dries. I've now shown you several methods and techniques for improving your watercolour skies. But the key thing really is to practice again and again. It should really pay dividends. You don't have to make each one a finished work on a large scale. It's often worth taking a large piece of paper and dividing it into postcard-sized sections and practicing them over and over again. Remember also to plan your sky carefully and keep your colours to a minimum so that your painting has a harmonious effect. And remember, it should be fun. So happy painting!